Hey, how's it going, guys? Baron here. Just thought I'd make a video about the benefits and the differences between the Paladin and the Shaman. A lot of people asking me whether they should go Alliance or Horde and stuff like that. And this is really one of the biggest contrasts between the two factions is the how the Shaman plays and how the Paladin plays and their benefits to the raid. So I'm going to try to lay it out for you so you can make an educated decision on which one you think you want to which side you think you want to play on. There's other factors, of course, but we're going to tackle this one first. But yeah, here we go. Some perspective and orientation here, so you know where I'm coming from. Um, this will be from a PVE standpoint. Um, I've had a lot of high-end rating experience pretty much ever since I've been playing WoW. Started back in 2004 in November when it launched. Played hardcore all the way to Icecrown Citadel as a dwarf hunter named Baron on US Lightbringer. Cleared all content in vanilla, TBC, and I didn't finish out Wrath, unfortunately. Like I said, I quit at the beginning of Icecrown Citadel, but up to that point I did. Retired for a couple of years, and I came back and played, casually after that. But on the private server side, played on Nostalrius as a human warrior named Cstrike. Cleared all content there. Then I went over to Horde side for Lightbringer to test out the waters, see how I liked Horde side. Played an Orc Shaman as restoration, named A Baron. Cleared all content there. Um, Currently, I'm playing Feral Druid. Uh, I've cleared through AQ40. I'm sure we'll finish out Nax no problems once that gets released, and that's on Northdale PvP. I also have played Paladin a great deal on retail during vanilla, and TBC was the majority of the time that I played it. I played a good bit in Wrath as well, but I ended up getting first in 5v5 season 4. Uh, but not a huge deal there. Fives is kind of whatever, but it was a lot of fun and gave me a good insight as to how the Paladin works, as well as, like I said, I played a Paladin a good bit in vanilla as well, raids and such as an alt. The primary differences between the Paladin and the Shamans, what we're going to look at here, comparing the two, their strengths and their weaknesses, and like I said earlier, these two classes represent the largest contrast between the Horde and the Alliance, and I'm just going to give you. I want to, inform you of some of the things that you're going to run into on both sides as to, you know, what to look out for as a DPS and some of the things that you're going to have in terms of buffs and what you're not going to have. But yeah, here we go. We're going to start out with the heals between the two classes first before we get into the buff section. Shamans up first. They got chain heal. This is really one of the strongest tools they have in their toolbox. Hits 3 targets, multi-target heal. It's extremely mana efficient, and it's just really, really good. There is no equivalent uh, for the Paladin. Paladin heals are all single target, one person at a time. Um, the general theme for Shamans, in my opinion, is the Shamans have higher throughput, but the Paladins have decent throughput, good throughput, but they're much more efficient. Shamans definitely need to focus on mana per 5, as mana is much more of an issue, especially if you got world buffs than it is for a Paladin. So we'll just keep that in mind as we go. Uh, so yeah, chain heal extremely good for when the melee are getting cleaved on something like Sartura, or for the melee stacks on Kel'Thuzad. Um, all that good. There's too many to name. Chain heal's fucking outstanding. That's pretty much all you need to know. Uh, it's really good. Paladins don't have it, unfortunately. Next up, lesser healing wave. This is and Flash of Light. These are both 1.5 second cast spells. The difference is Flash of Light is very mana efficient, but heals for less, and lesser healing wave is heals for more, but is very mana intensive. Uh, this is not something you want to just spam unless it's a short fight and you're able to maintain, you're able to not run out of mana. Uh, I usually use Lesser Healing Wave for, someone is critically low and I don't think I'm going to have time to land a Healing Wave on them. Or if we're just spot healing, I might downrank Lesser Healing Wave and use some of that. But usually in those cases, you're just going to be using Chain Heal if you're raid healing and such. But it's a mana hog. It'll you spamming this, you're going to run home. As compared to Flashlight heals for less, but is extremely mana efficient. I'll get into rank 1 Flashlight later, but there's some heals on the Paladin side that are just they're so cheap it's ridiculous, especially when you and extremely effective too when you couple them with Blessing a lot. Next up, the 2.5-second cast heals, the beefier heals, Healing Wave, 620 mana. And for the Paladin, it's Holy Light, 660 mana. These are more or less the same. Shamans get a little bit better healing benefit from Healing Wave because it's a longer spell cast. It's 3 seconds, but it gets talented down to 2.5. Holy Light is just base 2.5. They're both solid, and the next section, the next point we'll get into, we'll deal with the mana efficiencies between these two. But this is what you're going to be wanting when the raid's getting chucked, and or if you're going to be using Chain Heal most likely as a Shaman. But if the tank's getting chucked and you have the time to cast it, Healing Wave is going to get you higher healing per second than the Lesser Healing Wave spam, and it's just going to save you a hell of a lot of mana. Holy Light, that's what you're going to use for your Paladin if the tank is getting annihilated, or you can also downrank to rank 4, and is an extremely efficient thing to spam on the tank when you're not wanting to cancel cast on when healing the tank. Number 4, 8/8 Tier 1 Earth Fury. This gives you, the 5-piece gives you a 25% chance to give 35% of the mana back. 25% chance per Healing Wave cast. To get 35% mana back. However, the 8-piece makes it hit 2 additional targets for obviously a much less healing amount than the main target. But those also give a chance to give mana back. So this is an extremely powerful tier piece, which kind of resembles Illumination for Paladins. Illumination gives the Paladins a 100% chance to get all the mana back from a critical heal. So these are comparable. Illumination is obviously much better and provides scaling. If you get Whirl buffs, Nexia buffs 10%, Songflower is another 5%, Dire Maul North 3% spell crit, that's another 3. You can really get pretty darn high spell crit on a Paladin, as well as they get a decent conversion from intellect to spell crit. I think it's around 28 or so. So it's in the high 20s. So it's not too difficult to get spell crit on a Paladin towards the middle to late game. So it's really nice. And so in terms of efficiency, you're still gonna, Illumination is just better here. But this 8/8 Tier 1 actually calculated this out on Patchwork to be around 100, a little over 100 mana per 5. It's going to vary greatly depending on the encounter, but it's not to be overlooked. It's extremely good. And in general, just so you know, pretty much all the Shaman tier sets are quite good. At least the bonuses are. So, some of them have questionable itemization. Next up, Healing Stream. Not going to use this a whole lot. It's used on Lotheb. It's only about 15 to 20 healing per second. It does scale with spell power, but just not a whole lot. This is just not something you're going to use a whole lot. It also is a water totem, so if you're using Healing Stream, you're not going to be able to have a Mana Spring or a Mana Tide down while that is active. You'll have to pick one or the other. The Paladin equivalent to that is Judgment of Light, which is far better than Healing Stream. 50% chance or so to get 61 health back. So the melee attack very often and very quickly, in some cases several times per second. So this is quite a bit of healing for the melee on certain fights like Gold Mag or Magmadar. So there's a bunch of other fights that it's good for, but it's a lot better than Healing Stream, and it's raid wide. Affects the entire raid. Next up, Curing. Both of these classes have an advantage here. When it comes to poison and disease debuffs, the Shaman is the clear winner. He can drop a totem that instantly removes all poison, or he's got one that will remove all disease on his party. There's a handful of encounters that this is extremely nice for, like Viscidus comes to mind. The spiders and the and Naxxramas in the spider wing, and then it can be used some on Chromagus and stuff too, but it's a little bit doesn't it's not quite as good there. Hagen is another one, disease cleansing. You can drop that and just completely cleanse all the melee in your party, and not have to worry about getting it with the mana burn too much. They're curing. They also have single target poison and disease removal. But the big downside here is they're not able to remove magic, and the Paladin is. So this means Horde side, the only class that's going to be removing magic is the priest. I mean, warlocks, they have a fell hunter, but that's generally not going to be used. So this puts a lot more stress on the priest mana horde side than it does alliance side. You're just going to have less people able to remove magic debuffs horde side. And also you might have 6 to 8 shaman in a raid, and when you're only wanting maybe 12 healers total in a raid, or maybe less, this doesn't really leave a whole lot of room for druids and priests. So you might only have 3 priests, 4 priests, something like that. So that's not really a whole lot of people that are able to clean the entire raid for certain magic debuffs. Cleanse is one target at a time, disease, poison, and magic all in one swing. This is the best fight for this would probably be Chromagus, where he's putting one of each type debuff on people, and they might have two of the they might have a magic and a disease, they might have a magic and a poison and a disease, and one cleanse will strip all that off of them with one swing. So cleanses, they're about the same mana, the curing and the single target cure for the shaman and the paladin, but cleanse has its benefits as well. Really, they can remove magic and the shaman can't. It's like I said, the shamans definitely have the advantage when it comes to removing poison and disease, but the paladins are able to help out with the magic area, so it kind of evens out a little bit. But this is definitely one of the primary benefits to shaman, is being able to just mass remove poison and AQ40 and AQ20 and stuff. Last on this one, Nature's Swiftness. 3-minute cooldown makes your next heal instant. I've saved a whole lot of people from dying with this ability, and it's extremely good, and it's got a short cooldown. Nature Swiftness chain heals for Frost Blast people in Kel'Thuzad, or the tank took a huge hit. You can Nature Swiftness, get him a huge healing wave in there. It's just really good, and coupled with that, you're going to have, like I said, 6 to 8 shaman in a raid. That's a lot of clutch cooldowns available to the horde side raid that are not going to really be available the same way alliance side. The paladins get lay on hands, which is it heals the target for the health of the paladin. I mean, and it can crit. It is extremely good, but unfortunately has a 1 hour cooldown, 45-minute when it's talented. But it also comes with a 2-minute 30% armor buff. So there are a handful of encounters, maybe something like Patchwork, or if you're solo tanking the Garads, there's a couple of different encounters where you could maybe cast it. It does drain all the paladin's mana, but you could cast it and then drink to full prior to the fight to give the tank the buff, or just in the middle of the fight. If you're completely it is basically a full heal for the tank, more or less. So it is a really good cooldown, but it has a you can't use it very often. It's not 3 minutes like Nature Swiftness, of course. Anyways, that's summing it up for the healing portion for Shamans versus Paladins. For throughput and just overall, I give a edge to the Shaman. He can chug mana pots and kind of consume to make up for that lack of efficiency that the Paladins have. But with the multi-target heal, Shamans in general are going to be a better healer and able to do more throughput on a lot of fights than the Paladin will be. Paladins are more, they have, their efficiency is a lot better because of illumination, and also just because of flash of light, and their downranking is just outstanding. I mean, you can downrank flash of light to rank 1. It'll crit for over 1,000 healing, and it only costs you 35 mana. It's probably the most efficient mana to healing spell in the game. It's extremely good. So even if you're pretty much tapped out of mana, you can still cast heals on a Paladin. Whereas Shaman, you're pretty much, you're pretty much out of luck if you're out of mana. But like I said, I give a slight edge to the Shaman over the Paladin in terms of just healing power and capability. But yeah. All right, moving on. Next up, we got the buffs, offensive buffs from each class. This is the part you're probably going to be interested in if you're a DPS, as well as the next section. First up, Wind Fury Totem. This is one of the signature abilities from the Shaman. Grants the melee 1 extra attack chance on hit with a little bit of attack power added on to that attack, and Paladins just don't have any equivalent for this ability. There's a lot of different. It's a lot of fun, especially if you're using like a two-hander horde side. So if you're playing a warrior, I mean, Wind Fury's nice. It's really good. Like I said, it's a lot of fun. It's great for damage, but there is no equivalent for the Paladin. So this is definitely something the Shamans have as a leg up. There's a downside to it, and I'll get into that in a little bit as well. But so it's not it's not everything. But yeah, I'll get into the downside of that later. Next up, Blessing of Kings, 10% to all stats. So this is both an offensive and a defensive buff, so it'll be listed in the next slide as well. Basically, you're going to have higher strength and agility, regardless of what party you're in, alliance side, because of this. Yeah, there's I'll get into the strength of earth and grace of air, but just in general, no matter what party you're in, you're going to have your 10% stamina, agility and strength as a melee, as well as if you're a caster or a healer, you're going to get that 10% intellect, 10% spirit. So you'll have a higher mana pool by a little bit. That's also intellect is more spell crit. But yeah, there's no benefit to, or there's no equivalent rather, horde side to this ability. This is definitely one of the primary things Alliance has going for it, Blessing of Kings. All right, next up, Strength of Earth, Grace of Air. They're both add 77 to each stat. Strength of Earth is Earth totem, of course. Grace of Air is an Air totem, of course. And so is Wind Fury. So you can't have a Shaman both. You can't drop both Air, Grace of Air, and Wind Fury totem. So you're gonna have to choose between those two. There is a thing called totem twisting, but it's very mana intensive, and it requires 2 globals every 10 seconds to execute. So I don't 90% of guilds I don't think are going to be using too much of that. And if they are using it, it's going to be on a select few fights where there's not really a lot going on, and it's not really going to matter anyways. It'll just be for parsing. But yeah, there you go. Alliance side, you got Blessing of Might, 222 attack power when it's fully talented and has the max rank of it. And listed Blessing of Kings here as well, as you're going to get an attack power boost out of your 10% more strength and agility. So the big difference here is for rogues. Rogues only get 1 attack power for strength. So they're going to be getting 77 strength, which is 77 attack power, whereas an Alliance rogue is going to be getting 222 attack power, and he's going to be getting his 10% strength and agility. So your attack power, if you're a rogue, is going to be, a good bit higher Alliance side than it would Horde side. The difference is you're going to have Wind Fury, of course, Horde side. So, there you go. Next up, Mana Restoration. Mana Spring is 32-ish mana per 5, and Mana Tide will give you 1160 mana over 12 seconds. These are both water totems, so I'll get into that later with the resistance totems, but just know that they're water totems. Blessing of Wisdom, regardless of what party you're in, you'll have Blessing of Wisdom if you got Paladins in your raid. And Judgment of Wisdom is also raid wide, and it is about a 50% chance on hit to give you 59 mana back. As far as who has the edge here, I mean, I pretty much got to give it to Paladins because, if you only have 6 Shaman in a raid, then that leaves 10 people that aren't going to be getting Blessing of Wisdom, and they're probably going to be mana users. So, in a short fight, is a Shaman capable of restoring more mana? Yeah, he is, but he's also, if it's a short fight, you're probably not going to need that extra mana, most likely. The longer fights, like Cthulhu or Saffron or Kel'Thuzad or Four Horsemen, fights like that, there's no question that Blessing of Wisdom is just better. And in a lot, especially for trash, Blessing of Wisdom, you're just permanently going to have it, even if the Paladin dies or is in a different party. So, Judgment of Wisdom, like I said, is extremely good for certain fights. Nefarian, same other fights I listed, Kel'Thuzad, Saffron, can be very useful for those fights too. Lotheb restores a lot of mana. So yeah, I think you're going to end up having more mana because you're going to have 10% intellect, and regardless of what party you're in, you're going to have more mana at your disposal alliance side than you will horde. Next up, it's not really a buff, but it's offensive tools. Earthshock is a spell interrupt, and it's a ranged spell interrupt on a short cooldown. So there's a lot of encounters and raids where this can be very useful. As a healer, you're going to have to put some extra attention into finding ways to use it. Interrupting heals or spells that are something that might be about to nuke your tank. You can just Hearth Shock it and completely prevent it, or you can Grounding Totem it, which I'll get into in just a second. There's it's an extremely useful tool. It can help out. It can be very clutch. You could Earth Shock a Frostbolt on Kel'Thuzad and save the tank from getting one-shotted. The best thing I know to compare this with, really, on the Paladin side is Hammer of Justice, which is a 6-second stun, 1-minute cooldown. Hammer of Justice is extremely useful in certain fights. Sartura, a lot of trash mobs are stunnable. However, there are a lot of mobs that are just straight up immune to stun, and especially bosses. And there's a lot of bosses that cast spells that are interruptible, and the Shaman's able to help out with that, whereas the Paladin really doesn't have any equivalent. So, these are just two different abilities, roughly. I'm not really going to give an edge to one or the other. They're different. Last up, Shamans have Purge, Earthbind, Fire Nova, Grounding, Frost Shock. So they got an offensive magic remover. So there's a lot of mobs and raids and such that buff themselves with something. Lightning Shield, or there's different things in raids that mobs will buff themselves, and this helps out a lot, being able to purge it. Bone Shield, stuff like that. Earthbind is extremely good snare for certain fights, like Kel'Thuzad kiting the ads, or Gluth kiting those ads. If you have good communication with your tank and he gets trucked, you can have an Earthbind down for him, and he can just kind of run away till you get him topped off. There's just a lot of benefit to having a snare, and especially if you know how to use them properly, and the people around you know how to maximize that benefit of having that AoE snare. Fire Nova, this is good in a bunch of different areas. It's great for Viscidus, for example, or when you're AoEing anything. You can chip in a little bit, and when you got 6 to 8 Shaman and they all drop a Fire Nova, that's a significant that's a significant difference in terms of raid DPS. However, it is quite expensive, as a heads up, but it definitely has uses in raids, and is there's no Paladin equivalent really to Fire Nova. Grounding Totem can allow you to solo tank things like Assyrian. You can Grounding Totem the CC that he puts on the tank. You can also Grounding Totem, offensive spells that might be cast on your party or your tank. It's just a really clutch ability. It's really good, and there's no equivalent. The Paladin doesn't have anything of that sort. Frost Shock, pretty much the same as Earthbind. If you get aggro on an elite, a lot of times they're snareable. You can just hit it with a Frost Shock and run away, no worries. The main benefit I found this was for Kel'Thuzad. If you get a Guardian of Ice Crown on you, you can just Frost Shock it and run away, and pretty much just nullify that ad for the rest of the fight, as long as the others can chip in and fill in for you for healing. It could save your life. Paladin side, there's Consecrate. There's not really any equivalent to that. I'm sorry, the Paladin doesn't have really any of these abilities, and that's just kind of how they're made. Shaman is more offensive oriented, and the Paladin is more defensive oriented. So there's not really a whole lot of use for Consecrate in a raid. There might be a couple of areas you might use it to help AoE some ads down, but it's expensive and it really doesn't do a whole lot of damage. So it's just not something you're going to see used a whole lot. But it's really the only thing close to any of these that I know of that exists for Paladins. So that's why I listed it. Anyways, that wraps up the offensive buffs and such for these two. Next up, we got the defensive buffs, and this is really a big one here. Tranquility of Air reduces threat by 20%, and Blessing of Salvation reduces threat by 30%. So, as well as Blessing of Kings and Blessing of Salvation, these are the really big two things that the Paladin has going for it that are just not really possible or not really the same on the Horde side. Blessing of Salve is raid wide, regardless of where you are or whether I'm alive or dead. If I buff you with Salvation, you're going to have it, and it's 30%. Whereas Tranquility of Air is 20% and is limited by range, and it's limited by party. So, and it's also, the most important thing, is an air totem. So this means if you're a melee warrior or a rogue Horde side, you might be enjoying your Wind Fury, and it is outstanding, perk to have. But most likely you're not going to have your 20% threat reduction. So you might really like that Wind Fury, but you're going to be generating if you compare it to Salvation, you're going to be generating 30% more threat than the Alliance Warrior or Rogue will be. And in vanilla, threat is a real issue, as you'll find out. So the edge is, without question, goes to a Paladin here. Hits everybody in the raid. And once again, I'll mention it. You might have only six Shaman in a raid. Hopefully you got 8. You can just buff everybody. But let's say you only got 6 in a raid. It's going to leave groups 7 and 8 down there. Those last two groups, they're not going to have a Shaman. You might be a Warlock. You might be a Mage in one of those groups, or a Healer. You're not going to be getting any benefit whatsoever from those Shamans. Pretty much, you're not going to be getting your threat reduction. So, this is one of the problems with the Shaman. Next up, Blessing of Kings. It is also a defensive buff, as it gives stamina. You're going to have a slightly higher health pool as a tank or as anybody Alliance side, just because you're going to have 10% more stamina. It scales with everything. It's an outstanding buff, and it's one of the signatures abilities of the Paladin. So these are really the top two things the Paladin has going for it right here. And as I said, there's no equivalent Horde side. Next up, Blessing of Protection, Freedom, and Sacrifice. There's a lot of good use for protection. Blessing of Protection, it's good for certain encounters where maybe you got a mage that pulled aggro. You can bop him, and the boss will go back to the tank and not get out of position. or certain fights like Gluth, where you know the tank needs to reset his debuffs so he can be healed. You can solo tank that fight by just putting a blessing of protection on the tank until the debuff expires. There's a bunch of different uses for it, but that's the primary ones. Is saving a mage or a warlock that's got aggro and he's about to die. You can just make him immune for 10 seconds. There's no equivalent horde side. Freedom, blessing of freedom. There's a bunch of different fights this is good for. Anytime the tanks are getting snared or someone's trying to run away, or the best example would probably be like Spider Boss in Zul'Gurub. She nets the tank and then resets threat and runs away from him, so you can just give him a freedom and he's free to go pick the boss back up. And then blessing of sacrifice. The best one this was used for is like we ended up using this for the tank that was solo tanking the Gar ads. I found that blessing of sacrifice, even though it only transfers 55 damage from the tank to the Paladin, it was absorbing about 15 to 20% of the total damage that the tank was getting. So it actually ended up being a huge benefit on fights like that. But it's not used a whole lot. It's a decent PvP ability. I'll say that. But it does have its places where it's useful, but they're not too awful. There's not a whole lot of places you're going to use it. And there's no equivalent to any three of those horde side. Next up, damage reduction. Stone Skin Totem is a flat 30 to 36 damage reduction after armor. The equivalent for that for Paladins is Devotion Aura, which is 918 armor when it's improved. And they also have a flat damage reduction ability called Blessing of Sanctuary, which is just a flat 25 damage from damage reduction from everything. So those are kind of comparable. I will say the Devotion Aura is probably close to the same as the Stone Skin Totem at very high armor values, but Devotion Aura is definitely a lot better for, say, mages or warlocks, and or anybody that has a lower armor count and they might be taking damage on something like the Sartura fight. If they get cleaved, 918 armor to a mage or warlock could easily be about 10 or 15% damage reduction. Whereas, someone that's got 10 or 12,000 armor, it might only be 2% damage reduction. Next up, Ancestral Fortitude. This is a 25% armor boost for 15 seconds. And the Paladins do not have this ability. Priests do, which we have priests on both sides. But the uptime is obviously going to be much higher horde side for your tanks and your melee than it will be line side, just because you're going to have, like I said, 6 to 8 Shaman is usually what you want to bring. As a tank, you can pretty much count on this being up almost permanently, which is pretty nice. 25% armor is quite a bit. Next up, Tremor Totem versus there's Paladin. There's no equivalent, but you're not without fear immunity or fear removal. Priests do get fear ward. However, Tremor Totem gives a lot of flack. There's a lot of Shamans that don't like it. However, when I played my Shaman, I really liked Tremor Totem. It had a really high range on it. With my tier 1 bonus, it actually had 50 yards. I think the issue they get into there is they are just dropping the Tremor Totem and expecting the Tremor Totem to just do the job for them. Whereas the way that you should be doing things is you should drop the Tremor Totem when you see the fear hit your tanks or your melee or whoever, and then it will instantly remove the fear. So you just got to watch out for it and know how to use it properly. If you're just setting it down, waiting for it to tick, they might run around feared for 3, possibly even 4 seconds before they get a tick of it. Or even worse, they might get feared out of range of it. So you gotta be on top of it, and if you are, then Tremor Totem's really good. Fear Ward. There's times and places where I would prefer Tremor Totem, and there's times and places where I prefer Fear Ward. Um, there's a little bit more of a limitation on Fear Ward, as you're not going to have as many priests as you would Shaman in a raid. And also, they have to be a dwarf priest, and also there's a 30-second cooldown. So, if you're preemptive about it, you could get the entire raid buffed with Fear Ward on the way to a boss that does fear. But it's only going to last for one charge, and it's not something you're going to be able to sustain, except on the tank or a choice few targets. So there you go. I would say they're more or less about even. Some people would say you're crazy. Fear Ward's way better. But as long as you're using Tremor Totem properly, Tremor Totem's pretty darn strong. Next up would be wipe prevention. The Shaman has reincarnation. He resurrects with 20% hit points and mana. And divine intervention. The Paladin kills himself to put a 3-minute invulnerability shield on another player that brings him out of combat. Reincarnation is definitely better. You can't screw it up, really. I mean, you've already died, and you're able to come back to life with mana. In case you were at 0, you actually gained mana. And the cooldowns are pretty much the same. So the Shamans have the edge here in wipe prevention. I mean, you should have a Warlock with a Soulstone out there to take care of that and everything as well. But just in case you don't, you're going to have a lot of Shamans in the raid, and chances are one of them is going to have a reincarnation available to resurrect and revive everybody, get the raid back moving. Divine intervention, that's used a lot for wipe prevention as well, but there's a lot that can go wrong with it. You could DI the wrong target, or the target could die before you're able to place the buff on them. All that stuff happens sometimes. Next up, this is a buff. It's a talent in the restoration tree for Shamans. 18% more healing for Healing Wave. It stacks 6% at a time. For 3 stacks is 18%. It's pretty good. It's a must have. I like using it. There are a lot of Shamans that'll just straight chain heal. They'll go with the 2.5 tier set, and that's pretty much all they do is just chain heal. And if you're assigned to raid healing and that's all you're doing, then more power to you. But I always spec'd for this and took it because I was doing a lot of tank healing. When it's compared with Blessing a Lot, which is pretty much the same thing, it's buffing your healing spells on a single target. It gets 400 plus 400 healing to Holy Light and plus 115 to Flashlight. The difference is this has a much greater percentage effect because it's a fixed amount on a downrank spell than it does on like a max rank spell. Whereas Healing Wave doesn't really get the same benefit as that. For example, like I said earlier, your Flash a Lot rank 1 costs 35 mana and very well could crit for over 1,000. So the Shaman just really doesn't have anything like that. That's extremely low mana that you could cast indefinitely like that. So even if you're tapped out of mana, you can still do something on a Paladin. Whereas the Shaman, once you're out of mana, you're done. There's nothing really you can do. You could go kill yourself and resurrect, reincarnate, and you'll have 20% mana then. But other than that, totems are quite expensive. Mana is much more of an issue for Shaman than it is Paladin. Next up, the resist buffs that each brings. Shamans give Nature, Frost, and Fire resist, 60 to each. And the Priest Horde side have Shadow resistance covered. Paladins have Fire, Frost, Shadow. Shadow's kind of not used at all because, in a 40 man, maybe not in 20 man sometimes, but definitely in 40 man, you're going to have a Priest there and they're going to have the Shadow buff, so you're really not going to use that a whole lot as a Paladin. So, in terms of diversity there, you got to give it to Shaman. They can do Nature and the Paladin can't. However, Nature is an air totem, so if you're dropping Nature resistance, that means no Wind Fury or threat reduction. Frost is a fire totem, so not really a big loss there. And then the fire resistance totem is a water totem, so in Molten Core or BWL, if your Paladins are dropping the fire resist totem, you're not going to be getting your mana restoration totems for the most part. I mean, of course, it's worth it to lose your fire resist buff for 12 seconds while you get a mana tide, but you're not going to be getting any mana spring, is what I'm basically getting at, while the fire resist totem is down. Auras, Paladin side, are 30 yards, and they're 40 yards if you have the tier 2 3-piece bonus. Next up, we have Concentration Aura and Retribution Aura. There is no equivalent to these Horde side. Concentration Aura provides 35% resistance to spell pushback. This is really nice because all the healing classes have the ability to get to 70% pushback resistance, as well as mages can get to 70%. So if you give them Concentration Aura and it's a fight where you're constantly getting hit with some kind of AoE that would push back your spells, Veil Straws comes to mind, then this can get you to 100% immunity. This can make you immune to spell pushback, which can make a big difference in your DPS and obviously your healing. Retribution Aura, this is something that's, it's not a huge deal, but it definitely helps the tanks. I pretty much always request this when I have a Paladin in my group and I'm tanking more than one mob. It's an extra 20 damage every time a mob strikes you, and it really adds up when you're trying to tank 2, 3, maybe 4 or more mobs. It really gives you a boost to your threat, so it is nice to have. And lastly, but not least, we have Divine Shield. This is probably the #1 signature ability that the Paladin has. Complete immunity to spells and damage for 12 seconds on a 5-minute cooldown. This is really nice it can be used to circumvent certain mechanics. Things like Meexna, you can pre-bubble the AoE raid stun so that you can continue healing the tank when everybody else is stunned. You could do boss pulls where you just need someone to kind of go in and initiate combat without somebody getting one-shotted. That's used a lot for something like Major Domo. There's just a lot of good uses for Divine Shield, and adds a lot of resiliency and survivability to the Paladin that the Shaman might not have. He does have nature swiftness, but complete immunity is kind of hard to beat. So in the defensive area, as it should be, Paladins are more defensive oriented. They definitely have the advantage here without question. And on the previous slide, the offensive buffs, the Shamans are more offensive oriented. They have a bit of an edge there, especially when it comes to utility. And here we have a summary. Basically, just to recap what we've went over. The primary advantages for the Shaman is they have Chain Heal. Chain Heal is outstanding. It's extremely good. It's mana efficient, and it's a smart heal. It will jump within 10 yards to whoever the lowest health person is. It's the #1 tool that they have in their in their toolbox in terms of healing. It's just extremely good. They have higher throughput, mainly because of lesser healing wave spam. It is, it's a mana hog. It's expensive, but if it's the difference between someone dying or not, it's going to put out a lot more beef than the Flash of Light will, and they're the same cast time. And they have nature swiftness. We went into that. It's saved many people's lives for me when I play my Shaman. It can be extremely clutch, and it feels really good when you're able to get off that clutch nature swiftness. It feels really good. You let somebody know. They probably didn't even notice that you hit them, but you'll know, and you can let them know that they're alive because you were on top of it. As I said earlier, they have a lot of utility with totems and shocks, snares, interrupts, grounding, curing, and purging, and they have Wind Fury. The Shaman has a lot of utility. It does. Primary disadvantages. This is my #1 beef with Shaman, is the totems only affect your party. And they actually have quite short range. There's 20 yards untalented, 30 yards talented, and then 40 yards if you're wearing the 3-piece tier 1. There's some exceptions to that, like Tremor Totem has an additional 10 yards range, but for the most part, that's the range on all your totems. Higher skill cap, that's not necessarily a disadvantage. I had to list it somewhere, but it definitely requires a lot more skill to play a Shaman to the best of its ability than it does of a Paladin. I'm not saying that Paladins are mindless or, there's nothing clutch that you can do on a Paladin or anything like that. Paladins have plenty of different things they can do that pull a ton of weight. But I'm just saying in general, to play a Shaman to its fullest potential will require a good bit more skill than it will for a Paladin. This is another big disadvantage. They can't remove magic, as I said earlier. The only class that's really going to be removing magic horde side would be the priest. There might be a few cases where some gangster warlock's going to be devouring magic off people, but for the most part, it's just going to be the priest. And this puts a lot more stress on the priest than there would be Alliance side. And lastly, the Wind Fury totem, as good as it is unfortunately an air totem, and so is their threat reduction totem. So, like I said earlier, if you're a melee, most of the time you're going to have to pick. Do you want your 20% threat reduction, or do you want, your Wind Fury? Most of the time you're going to go with your Wind Fury and just try to watch your threat meter, but just know that you're going to be generating, Salvation is 30%. You're going to be generating 30% more threat as a melee than your alliance counterpart. And also I mentioned, the fire resistance totem for Molten Core and BWL is a water totem, so you won't be getting your mana restoration if you're a mage, a warlock, a healer, whatever, if you're getting your fire resist buff. Just so you know. For the Paladin, primary advantages, their heals are a good bit more efficient than the Shaman in general, or the single targets are, because of illumination and its scaling with world buffs. They have Divine Shield. This is really good for, like I said, circumventing certain mechanics or just saving you in a really bad moment. And they have a lot of other clutch blessings that can really save the day. If you got a DPS that peels, and there's really no way to get it off of him other than to hit him with Blessing of Protection, that you could save his life there. There's just a lot of good uses for Blessing of Protection. So that's something that you're not going to have horde side. Blessing of Freedom. There are a few encounters where this is really important, and then Blessing of Sacrifice, as I said, there are also a few counters for that to be that can be good as well. And this is really the big one right here. Every blessing and judgments are completely raid wide. That means if I'm in a 40-man raid and I'm the only paladin in there, I'm going to be able to get my buffs on all 39 other players. Whereas if I'm a shaman, I'm limited to just the people in my party. So it's a big one. It's a big one. Judgment of Light and Judgment of Wisdom are extremely powerful, and then all the other blessings. 3 to 4 paladins can pretty much provide the entire raid with every blessing that they would need. Primary disadvantages. They are missing a lot of the offensive tools that the shaman has. I mentioned most of those. They don't have a snare. They don't have interrupt. They don't have purge. They're just a defensive-oriented class, so they're missing a lot of those offensive tools and things that the paladin has, that the shaman has. And lastly, they don't have a multi-target heal. Paladin healing is great, but they don't have chain heal. So this is definitely a leg up that the shamans have, being able to cleave heal, where paladins are not able to do that. Flash of Light is great. and is extremely good for raid healing, and Holy Light is really good if the raid is you know really has a health deficit, but yeah, like I said, I give the healing advantage a little bit to Shamans. And there you go, boys. I hope this helped a little bit. It brings some light as to what you can expect from each during Classic, and hopefully it helps you make your decision. Whether you want to play Horde, whether you want to play Alliance, which one you're going to enjoy the most. That's my goal here, was to give you some information to help you make that decision. Hopefully this video did. Um, I'm really looking forward to any questions you might have, as I've played both classes a great deal. And also I have a lot of other players that would be happy to help if you have any questions about either class or the raid environment to expect during Classic. Here's my Discord. Feel free to hop in there and ask any questions, and I will get back to you. This is my main Twitch stream, and my backup Twitch, and this is my primary streaming service here, YouTube. Stop by and take a look, and like I said, hit up the comments or hit me up in Discord. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have, and have a nice day, and we'll catch you later.